And a good football Friday, Birds fans. Excuse me, all choked up. Show hasn't even started. Welcome to Birds 365. John McMullen, Jody McDonald, hanging with you. We get an hour of Johnny Mac before he has to go over and do some duties from the NovaCare complex. But you were over there yesterday, John. Full practice, full injury report. Some good news, some bad news. I would say mixed news out of yesterday as far as the Birds' health goes.
Yeah, I would say safety obviously is the biggest concern. Justin Evans, he was out there on the side field working on his conditioning, so that's a good sign long term. But I don't think it's a good sign this week. So he's not practicing. Sidney Brown wasn't practicing. Sidney looked a little bit closer, if you can tell. And that's going to be big. They might rule him out today. They might play the questionable route to, competitive advantage, Nick Sirianni. But there's a good chance that neither's going to be available. And that means you have two safeties right now on the roster. We're talking about a lot of cross-training. They have started cross-training Kaylee Ringo. So that's the sort of safety net, it seems. With Sidney Brown, though, you're also talking about the slot now as well. So it's going to be interesting because Washington has a more, whatever you want to call it, a traditional, typical slot receiver in Curtis Samuel, a guy who is really quick versus, what we talked about, the bigger slots that maybe James Bradbury matches up well against. At least physically, this would be the kind of guy you want, the smaller, ship to your typical slot corner that we think about. So that's going to be an interesting matchup to watch and see what the Eagles do. But they don't have Sidney Brown either, and I'm not sure if he's a matchup for that anyway. So it might have to go back to Mario Goodrich. So a lot of moving parts in the defensive backfields.
Give me the Sirianni take on Mario Goodrich. What he has said since the surprising inactivity this past week, where most of us thought Goodrich was going to start and play most of the time in the snap, and he ends up not being even active for the game. What has the coach's statement been on Goodrich?
I don't think he's been asked about Goodrich, and if I did, if he was, I wasn't paying attention. I don't believe he was asked. I mean, typically, Nick doesn't get a lot of questions about the defense because that's Sean Desai's purview. So I pay more attention to Sean. They said all they needed to do by not being active. I mean, that tells you all you need to know.
Was he that bad in the second game of the season that they said we need to just bench this guy? How does he go? How does he go from playing to being inactive?
Well, he didn't play well, but I thought he played okay and got better as the game on. Now, if you look at the numbers, he was thrown at 6 times and he gave up 6 completions. So, I think the passer rating was 140-ish when they targeted him. Not good. But again, that was that was later in the game, most of it. Sometimes he was on Jefferson. They weren't traveling people. The Vikings were behind. They were throwing a lot. They had a lot of success, a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns.
That doesn't sound good, John, I got to tell you.
And he got a little bit better as the game wore on. Of those 6 completions, 2, for instance, were to backs. Now they don't have good backs. We saw that, and he was right there. So he gave up the completions, but it was an outlet pass, and he gave up like 1 yard and 2 yards. That's what you're supposed to do. That's not a big completion. Who cares? So it's such a small sample size. And I thought my theory going into the Tampa game was, well, obviously got thrown in cold, injury replacement, settle him down. He's got a whole week of prep. he'll be better in Tampa. They thought otherwise. So it's not even about what they say, it's about what they do, and they made him inactive. So that tells me more than what they're saying. Sean Desai said I thought what I said. I thought he got better as the game went on against Minnesota. They didn't make him active. So that tells you all you need to know. And they need a slot corner. And Sean was talking yesterday, and it certainly seemed that the foreshadowing was the long-term plan here is now Sidney Brown to be the slot corner, which is interesting for a lot of reasons, but he might not be able to play this week. So again, you have to, okay, that's fine long term, but you got to get through this week, and you might have to have Mario Goodrich again. And what did you do to his psyche by not making him active? All factors into it. But clearly they said what they said by not making him active.
Right. Their actions speak much louder than their words. And when he's thrown back in this week, I'm sorry, I'm going to want some words to explain. If he was cutting him slack because didn't know he's going to play, Avonte Maddox gets hurt early in the game, you don't know he's going to be forced to play as much as he does. You see improvement over not enough improvement to even make him active week number 2. So you went to the film, you saw it, he just doesn't look ready. Now you're throwing them back in just because you have no other options. That they are so. If both backup guys are hurt and you've got to go to Mario Goodrich, that doesn't bode well, John. If he's playing a significant number of snaps this week because they have no one else, that's a bad sign. I know injuries are something that everyone in the National Football League has to deal with. But that puts the Eagles in a bind defensively for me.
Yeah, they do. It does, no question. And we've been talking about that for a couple days now. Multiple injuries at the same position. Now we got 3 injuries at the same position. Last week it was 2 coming in. Potentially, if Sidney can't go. So that's difficult, and that's always going to be difficult. But I think this team is built the same anyway. Look, and when they're completely healthy, the strength is the front, and the front has got to carry the coverage a little bit. And I think that's the case this week, and they've been able to do it so far for the most part. They're going to lean on that front, and the good news there is Hassan Reddick, the cast is off, so maybe he's got better use of his hand. Maybe the production everybody's looking for, even though the pressure rate is better this year than it was last year from Hassan Reddick. Maybe starts finishing a little bit more. People get excited about that. But, yeah, the front's got to carry the back end a little bit.
If Bradbury's got to take a good percentage, whatever that percentage is of the numbers in the slot, did Desai talk about what he's looking to see out of Job? It means more playing time for him for sure. If Bradbury's dropping down to the slot, how did he think Job has played so far in the?
Yeah, well, they obviously like Josh because that was the mentality of moving a really good outside corner inside, which still doesn't make sense to me. I'm honest about that. I think it's the rare, I don't want to say bad decision, but a questionable decision. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just because of how good Bradbury is outside. And this is maybe a better week to judge that because, as I said, you have the more shifty, speedy slot corner who's going to do some jet sweep stuff. I haven't watched Washington a lot, but he has in the past. He's going to do some orbit motion stuff. They're going to try to get him in space. And you typically want a more traditional slot corner. Maybe the Eagles just zone it up and deal with it that way, which is my guess of what they'll do. But they have pretty good receivers. Now, it's very similar tilting the other way. They don't have a good offensive line. So is Sam Howell have time to find those receivers? Because Mike Evans is going to the Hall of Fame, something Nick Sirianni agreed with. And, he made some plays here and there. He had the garbage drive late. Baker Mayfield didn't have time to get him the football. Receivers, no matter how good they are at the mercy of other aspects of the game. They need somebody to get them the football, obviously the quarterback, and they need the quarterback to be able to get them the football with the offensive line. So I've been talking about it all week. If you can't block people, you can't win. You saw it last night if you're watching the Thursday night game. Detroit dominated Green Bay's offensive front, vice versa. Their offensive line dominated Green Bay. Was a laugher, wasn't even as close as the final score. It's not just here in Philadelphia. If you can't block people, you can't win.
I was kind of impressed by Detroit's defense. I knew Detroit had offensive weapons, and I thought they'd move the ball against Green Bay, but their defense really took the Packers' offensive line to task. I didn't necessarily see that coming. So the Lions are a team that we will keep our eye on. With the fact that the Commanders just got their tails kicked last week by the Broncos. It wasn't clear. Again, 30-point loss, and you say it wasn't as close as the score indicated. That's pretty damn bad, and that's what happened last week against the Broncos. The Broncos got a ton of pressure on Sam Howell, and he made mistakes, and he took sacks, and their offensive line just wasn't up to snuff. The Eagles have been very good with getting pressures, not necessarily good with getting sacked. The sack numbers off from last year when they went one of the most historic sack seasons in the National Football League. Just keep doing what you're doing. Is Sean Desai going to do anything differently than we've seen in the first three games? My off the top of the head response would be, why change anything? But you've got a team where you really can take advantage of it. What do you expect the defensive pressures to look like from the Eagles on Sunday?
No, I think, more likely you just rely on their ability to beat people this week, even more so, because you can probably lean a lot more on coverage and give the extra help there. And you probably need it because of what we're talking about at the slot position. You expect that defensive front to whip that offensive front, and I expect it. You should expect it. It's probably going to happen. Is it going to be as bad as last week in Buffalo? Probably not, because teams tend to overcorrect. So you're going to see a lot of max protection, I would imagine. You're going to see game planning to get the football out of his hand. That's why I talk about get the ball to Curtis Samuel in space, see if he can do something with a manufactured touch, bubble screen that I love so much. Make sure the football's out quickly. So they're going to be game planning all that stuff. They're probably going to overcorrect because they were so bad, as you mentioned, against Buffalo. So I don't expect another 9-sack, 4-interception performance from Sam Howell, because that's the way the league works. They just overemphasize certain things coming off a bad week. But I don't see how they hold up the entire game against that defensive front. I just don't see it. And
what scares me the most about this upcoming game on Sunday, John? I feel right about the same way about this matchup as I did week 9 last year when the Commanders came into the link. There's no way there's no way they can play with. Come on, Taylor Heineke. We've helped to run Carson Wentz out of the league. We're gonna do the same thing to Taylor. And the Commanders came in and found a way to win. Now, I'll tell you, the Eagles shot themselves in the foot as much as the Commanders took the game. But are the Eagles, is that at least a possibility that they could shoot themselves in the foot this week?
It's the NFL. It's always a possibility. Arizona beat Dallas last week. You mentioned that Washington game. People talk about the running game in that game. It was like, I had to look it up. Brian Robinson had 26 carries for 86 yards. So it was like 3.3 yards a carry. And then Gibson was like 14 for 44. I got my notes. So that was 3.1 yards per carry. Samuel was 4 for 12 on those manufactured touches. So that was 3 yards a carry. And Heineke ran it like 5 times for 10 yards. That was 2 yards a carry. That was their running game. Their longest run of the game was 11 yards. Yeah, I call it the 3 yards in a cloud of dust game.
Yeah.
What the Eagles did, how the Eagles lost that game was turnovers. They turned it over 4 times. And that was very atypical of the Eagles last year. Now, one was that Dallas Goedert play that everybody, and obviously should have been a penalty. And he fumbled the football, understandably so, as he got dragged to the turf by his helmet, by his face mask. So, it was a perfect storm for Washington. They took advantage of it. Give them credit. 3 forced fumbles, interception, 4 turnovers for the Eagles, and 3 yards. Go for it on 4th. Yeah, I mean, it was, and they were disciplined, and they were playing from the lead because of those turnovers. So if all that happens again, yeah, Washington can win the game. Is all that going to happen again? I wouldn't bet on it.
All right. One of the things we'll run by Paul Domwich, who's ready to join us. He's up next here on Birds 365. Is that game? The Eagles had been unbelievable last year at coming out in the second quarter and just opening holes, opening gaping leads. The biggest one, of course, was in the scoreboard. They didn't do that last year against Washington. They haven't been as good a second quarter team this year. Wonder why. We'll run it by Paul Domwich from the 3013 and the stats package from JAKIBsports.com, which is officially up right now. If you want to check it out, we'll bring Damo in next here on Birds 365.